Hey everybody, welcome to Precision Machine Shed. I am Brett, and today, new lathe time. Today what I want to do is kind of go over this machine. So I just picked this thing up a week ago, and I just got it in my garage today, and I have basically not touched this thing. My goal today is try and give you guys a look at this thing, the way I usually buy these things. They can, sometimes they're rough, sometimes they're in great shape, but this one is a good example of something you might go out and if you're out there in the market to try and purchase a lathe, maybe it's your first one, maybe it's your second one, maybe it's, who knows. But there are some things to look for when buying a machine like this. So this is a used machine. It's 1970s era Harrison M300. It's a 13x40. It's one of my bucket list lathes, and they don't come up very often, so I actually found this one about 5 hours away, and I went and picked it up, and here it be in my shop. What I'm going to do is kind of go over some of the things that you can look for on these machines. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of people asking, you know, what do I look for in a machine? How do I assess it? You know, what are some do's and don'ts, and what am I looking at? What I'm going to do with this one is, this is a prime example of sometimes you go and look at a machine and it's not running, it's not powered up. Either they don't have the correct power source to power the lathe, or it hasn't ran in several years. So there are things that you can look for in some of these lathes, even when they're not running, to verify if it's something you want to get involved in or not. We'll start with the basics, and then we'll kind of go from there, and I'll give you a good idea of what I look for when I look for a lathe, in a used lathe especially, and show you some of the things to look for, some of the more obvious things to look for. You can get as involved as you want with these machines as far as measuring and checking all this other stuff, but there's, you know, if this is your first lathe or you're just getting into this, there's a few things that you can look for, and it's pretty simple and it's easy stuff to remember. So let's take a look, and we'll kind of start with just an overall appearance of this thing. As I said, this is a mid-70s to late 70s Clausing M300. It's a 13x40 lathe. It is a 3-phase machine. Some of the nice features on this lathe are it has the speed controls, it has the lead screw forward and reverse and neutral, and also has the selector box for the gears for threading and feed and speeds. This lathe has a D14 spindle on it, so it'll take D14 back plates, or 4D1, however you want to say it. It does have hardened bedways, which is always a nice feature on a lathe. Also has the large dials, both the compound and the cross feed, and it has the carriage wheel on the left, threading nut, and the feed engagements, and it also has a one-shot oiler when there's oil in there, on-off switch, and this particular one is fitted with a trava dial, so that's kind of cool, and of course the threading dial down there. This lathe also features the actual lead screw and the feed screw, which is nice. And another nice feature is that it has a foot brake, which is very handy. Of course, the first thing you do when you go to look at one of these machines is look at the overall appearance of the machine. You can take a look at it and kind of see, does it have a brand new paint job? Why does it have a brand new paint job? Are they trying to hide something? Or are they just trying to make it look nice so you pay more money? This particular machine has the original paint job. As you can see, these machines at this time were painted this beautiful green color, and it has not been repainted, which is kind of nice for me because then I get a little better idea of the overall condition of the machine. You can see wear in the paint in a lot of the places, like up here where things are set. Up here, people tend to put their hand up here, over here where you're moving. And then it also has, up on top of the tailstock here, people either set stuff, or when they're moving it, they usually grab it wherever they grab it and move it, which is fine. I also got a little bit of a backstory on this machine. It came from a guy that passed away, and another gentleman bought it, and it sat in his unheated, unclimate controlled garage that was fairly damp. He did, however, he mentioned, he dumped a bunch of transmission oil, whatever type of oil he dumped all over it, and that kind of kept some of the surfaces clean, but a lot of them got rust and surface rust, and it doesn't look the greatest, but I think it's something that can be cleaned up. One of the next things we're going to look at is what comes with this machine we're buying. You can get everything from everything under the sun to nothing at all. So a couple basics you may want when you're looking for a metalworking lathe is a 3-jaw chuck, a 4-jaw chuck, some sort of a tool post, a live center, a dead center, and a tailstock chuck would be nice. Those are kind of the absolute basics. Anything on top of that is great. If you get a collet set up, if you get a taper attachment, if you get any sort of other attachments, any sort of other chucks, face plates, you know, and the list goes on and on. So with this particular one, the guy kind of told me what he had there, and he didn't really know a lot about these things, and he actually never got it powered up from what he told me. And not his fault, he just wasn't very knowledgeable on these types of machines. He thought it was actually a 220 volt single phase. So he gave me this 220 volt converter box that he purchased to try and run this thing, and he instantly blew a fuse on that, but those are like $100. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's a 110 to 220 volt transformer. And of course, with this one, I knew it had an Aloris BXA tool post, and then there's 5 holders with a monster boring bar holder, and then this one, and a couple other ones here, a couple standard ones. Here's the tailstock, or sorry, excuse me, the spindle adapter. So this goes in your spindle, and you can spin a dead center on there. Extra, you know, T-nut for the tool post, and it had a collet attachment. So this is a collet gear that goes on the end of the spindle, which is nice, and 2 extra gears, which is nice to have. Miscellaneous stuff, live center, here's a pressure oiler that came with the machine, here's a wrench that came with the machine, 4-jaw chuck, a bunch of miscellaneous stuff, some drill bits and some reamers that are in the box, not a big deal, and then the owner's manual, which is very nice to have, and that's nice to look through, and if you're unfamiliar with the machine, you can look through that and look at that. That motor is off something else, so that's not part of it. The next thing I look at on a machine, if it has it, are the oiler windows, and this one has several of them. And so we look here, and there's usually a line in there with oil, and you should be able to see it. So there's 1, 2, 3, I believe, on this machine. And what you want to look for is that they're either have oil in them or they're topped off. If there's no oil in them, either the machine hasn't run for a long time or they don't maintain it very well. This particular one, the headstock oil, which is one of the main ones, that has oil and it's full. The gearbox on the gearbox selector is full, and my apron is empty, but that's kind of, some of those aprons leak, so that's not surprising, but you kind of want to see oil in there if at all possible. Next place I usually go is underneath the headstock. Here's the chuck, here's our V-ways, the front one is a V-way. So we're going to look close, and it usually doesn't take too much looking to figure it out, but this one has some surface rust on it, that's fine. But what we're looking at is this surface. Paper towels work great because you can clean them off. And what we see here is a wear ridge in the bed. So this should be flat all the way across, and right in the middle here we see a ridge. So this saddle assembly has been riding on these V-ways and not touching in the middle, which is part of the design of this machine, but it's leaving a wear mark there. So we can see that, and you can look all the way down the bed and see how far it goes. Most of the time they're usually right up close under the chuck, and that can tell you a couple things. Number one, it's going to tell you it has some wear on it, and if that has wear, the rest of the machine probably has wear to some extent or another. Doesn't always mean that the machine is shot or beat. Somebody could have used this machine as a sanding, polishing machine, and they might have just worn the ways out and the rest of the machine could be fine. Or they could have used the machine that much that the rest of the machine is worn out, and you may want to evaluate that machine very closely and see what you're getting yourself into. The next place I go to is the headstock. I kind of look and see what we're dealing with here. So in order to assess this without actually turning the machine on, ideally you would take this cover off, look inside there, look at all the gears, make sure nothing's broke, cracked, chipped, there's not metal in the bottom of the gearbox. However, some guys might not want you doing that, so the way around that is we can check a few things. This particular lathe has a neutral spot right there, so we can spin it. And you can spin it, listen for any noise. I can hear the gears rolling just a little bit in there, not too bad though. No clunkiness, no grinding, no hard spots. The spindle spins freely, so that's good. So we can put it in gear, check it. We can go through all the gears, and when you get some of these higher speed gears, you can spin it a little bit by hand. This one you can spin pretty easy, listen for noises. And then we can go through some of these other gears. Listen for noises, not hearing much. Went to that one, go to this one, and make sure it's in gear. And go to the next one. I think there's one more. There we go. We can go back, and these get a little harder. Put it in gear, and oh, so you can turn it, but it's hard. So physically, without looking inside the gearbox, I can get a pretty good idea that most of these gears are probably in pretty good shape. Might there be wear on them? Yes. Are they cracked, chipped, broken? Possibly, but this gives us a good idea that it's probably in good shape inside there. We can do the same thing with the lead screw here. Spin the chuck on either neutral or in a high gear, and it should spin. Both of our screws are turning there, both directions. And then while we're engaged here, we can go through and change some of the gears in the gearbox. So let's go through, and not all these positions will turn both of those, so give them a couple spins on each one, and this should be pretty good to be able to turn them around. And then down here we can change this one too. Make sure all that stuff's working. Make sure all these levers are moving freely. And I gotta go this way for this one. And you can stop at each one, spin it a little bit if you want. But there, we went through pretty much all of them, and we didn't hear any noises. It moved pretty freely, and I'm pretty happy with that. So I think if I had this thing powered up and running, everything should work, and I'm not too worried about it. While we're looking at the headstock, we'll go back, open up the side gear cover, and gearhead lathes should always have gears out here to run the gearbox and the thread cutting lead screws. So we'll just spin the chuck and just look at the gears. You don't need to really mess with them too much. You can check and see if they're loose anywhere. But these all spin pretty good. There's oil on them, which is good. And I see no broken, chipped, or cracked teeth, so that's good right there. So at this point I'm pretty happy with this end of the lathe. Moving on to the whole apron carriage assembly, there's a few things to look for here. A lot of lathes, especially a lot of old US lathes, will get loose in here, everywhere almost. A couple of the first things that I look at is the carriage hand wheel. So this, of course, moves the whole assembly back and forth, and you want to check and see how much slop is in there. Most lathes will have a little bit, and this one ain't too bad. The other thing is lift this handle up and down. Wiggle it around. If it moves, it might move just a tiny little bit, but if it's loose in there and it wobbles, you either have a worn shaft in here, you have a worn housing, or you can have worn both. So that's something to look for, and that kind of goes associated with a lot of other wear on the machine. Same thing with the cross slide. This particular lathe has a backlash take-up on the cross feed screw, which is very nice, but you can check backlash on these. I don't even know what this one has. Not that much. 35 thousandths. I could take that out, but 35 thousandths isn't bad. If you get like old South bends, you can tighten it up, back it up, and then you turn it the other way and you'll get play. So that's my play before it re-engages, and then it starts moving the cross slide that way. If you tighten this up and then you crank it around once or twice before it re-engages, you have a couple things wrong there. You have potentially bad crossfeed screw or a bad crossfeed nut, or both. Usually it's both. That can be resolved to some extent. However, if you got a worn, if those are worn, you're probably going to have wear in the dovetails of your cross slide assembly here. Same thing with the compound. This one is quite a bit tighter. I don't know what there's 7/8 thousandths play in that one. These usually tend not to get used quite as often as the cross slide, but they can get wear on them. I bought a lathe one time where the guy used nothing but this because this was broken. So he only used this. This was in great shape, this was worn out. This is easier to replace. You can usually buy this whole assembly easier. If you got to fix this as far as the wear in the gibs and the dovetails, you have to have it done by a professional if you don't know how to scrape and remachine all those parts. Of course, the half nuts, you can lock them and move it back and forth a little bit, and it should wobble a little bit. Sometimes these lead screws have a clutch pin in them where if you lock everything up, it'll spin the pin out. In that case, they may move back and forth a little bit, but this one's pretty tight. You can check these. There we go, now it's engaged. So that's engaged, and if we want to go the other way, there we go. Now that's crossfeed is engaged. So both those lock up good the way they're supposed to. One-shot oiler, there's no oil in there, so I can't really test that. One of the last things we're going to look at visually is tailstock. So we can check and see backlash on this, and this there's almost no backlash, which is great. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to slide this thing off the end here. And careful, because sometimes these are heavy. I'm going to very gently set it back up here. We're going to tip this thing over, and we're going to look underneath here. Here's the front edge of our tailstock, and what we're looking for here is the base. So sometimes on these machines you can feel down here if there's any scoring. Sometimes you can see the original hand scraping marks if it's an older lathe. The one thing you do want to look for though is there's usually a little ridge, and this one has it right here. And no surprise, this machine is 50 years old. So there's a tiny little ridge. If you can see right there, there's the original surface, and here's the wearing surface, and there's maybe a, I can just get it with my thumbnail, maybe a couple thousandths wear on that. It's usually on the front edge, not as much on the rear edge because when you're pushing, it pushes down on the front. So we do have a tiny bit of wear on this, but a couple thousandths is not a big deal, and these tailstocks can be shimmed between the base plate and the actual tailstock. They can be shimmed to straighten them out, so it's not the end of the world there either. And of course the last thing I'm going to look at after I've been fairly satisfied with the rest of the machine, you know, we looked at it and we figured that's, you know, it's okay for what we want. Take a look at the chuck and the spindle. And the reason I do this last is because if nothing else checks out and this is garbage, then well, there's no use. But I mean, I suppose you could do it first things first, but either way, you want to get a pretty good idea. If the rest of the machine's in pretty good shape, the spindle is usually in pretty good shape as well. So that's why I do it last. You could do it first, like I said, but it doesn't matter. So what we want to do here is get a chuck in there. And I don't care about run out on this bar. It's not really going to tell you much. What is going to tell you a little bit, or actually quite a bit, is you should get a test indicator. And this is a 1/2 1,000ths. This is a Swiss 1/2 thousandths indicator. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on our spindle. So when we get this guy on here, I'm going to put it up right next, as close as I can. Okay, so our indicator is set up here, and what I want to do, this bar is about 1 foot long and it's clamped tight in our 3-jaw chuck here, and what I'm looking for is how much play I can get out of that thing. This Harrison lathe has gamut bearings in it, which are pretty high precision bearings, and I believe I was reading through the manual, it said somewhere between 1 and 2/10 of a thousandths. It shouldn't be running more than a couple tenths of a thousandths out. So that's what we're looking for. And what I'm going to do is just lift up here kind of as strong as I can, and that, try it one more time. I'm going to push down, I'm going to push back up, push down, push back up, and that needle barely moves. So that's a half a thou indicator, and it's moving maybe a couple thousandths. So I'm pretty happy with that. Next thing I'm going to do, and we have to keep in mind here that this surface is rough, I'm going to spin this spindle slowly and watch for any movement in that needle, and it's jumping around because there's rust on the surface, but it is staying from one side to the other spot on the mark, maybe a couple, maybe a thousandths or two out. There's the rust, but it's staying pretty much where it needs to stay. It's not moving very much, if any. So I'm pretty happy with that. That tells me that the bearings are probably still in good shape, and they are probably snugged down to the proper tension, or pretty close. This all may depend on what type of lathe you have. For a little comparison, here is my South Bend Heavy 10. This is I think this is a late 70s, early 80s model, and it's in really good shape actually. A thing to keep in mind when testing these bearings like this is some lathes have more clearance spec'd out to them than others. That Harrison has maybe a tenth or two. This South Bend has maybe 1 to 2 thousandths. So 10 times as much on this machine. Not to say it's a bad machine, but you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at these things. Just to show you, I know you can't see it the greatest there, but I'm going to push down on this, and then I'm going to lift up. So that's pushing up and down. I get just over a thousandth of an inch. So this machine is actually in pretty good shape too. It's for the type of, these are sleeve bearings that ride on oil. So right at a thousandths, maybe a tad bit more. That's kind of the lower end of where you want to be on these South Bends. If you're getting more than 2 thousandths, that's not great. That's not good. If you're getting less than a thousandths, that bearing might be too tight in there, and you have to go in there and adjust it, and it might be burned up. So you got to be careful with these South Bends because they can be touchy. But this one looks to be in good shape. All right, so there we go. There's my little overview of kind of what I look for when I'm shopping for a lathe. I did exactly what I showed you guys, minus I didn't stick an indicator on the spindle when I bought this thing, when I picked it up. I saw it for sale. I told the guy it's what I want, as long as it's in decent shape and what's there is what's there, I'll buy it. He wasn't asking a lot for this machine, and I'll tell you what I paid for it if you comment below and let me know what you're thinking. What I'm going to do next with this machine is I'm going to go through and clean it, get it cleaned up how I want it. I'm not going to repaint it because I don't have time to repaint this thing. It's just not in my time budget. And I'm going to make sure, actually, once it is fired up and running, it actually functions the way I want it to function. If it does that, being that I've wanted this lathe for a long time, I might actually send it out and get the bed ground. I'm not sure. It's only a thousandths or two, but we'll see. So that's next step. Alright guys, I hope that helped you out a little bit, and if you're going out to look for a new lathe, it always helps to bring somebody with that has a little bit of experience with metalworking machines or equipment, and they can look for some things sometimes that you may forget, or even write a checklist of things that you want to look at while you're there so you don't forget. Because I've been there before where I've looked at a machine and then I get there and I'm going through all these things that I think I want to look at, and then I say, yeah, I'll buy it. And then I buy it, and then I get home and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to look at that, or I forgot to look at that. And you know, most times you luck out and it's okay, but it's just one more thing. Everything you can check off the list will make you get a better deal or get the machine that you want to get. I'm also going to go over in a future video about how I go about buying these machines, kind of the process I go through, what I pay for some of them. I might actually go through my shop and let you guys know what I paid for some of these machines, because a lot of people want to know out there, what is this worth? What is that worth? And it's hard to put a dollar value on some of these things. There's a retail market out there that's kind of a gray, a borderline midline price on all these things. But depending on who's selling it and where you get it from, it can go high, it can go low, it can go anywhere in between. So I'm going to make a video to show you guys how I go about buying machines, how I find them, how I buy them, kind of some of the process of going through and maybe getting a better price on a machine or just getting the machine. So that will be in a future video, and comment below and let me know if there's anything you would like to hear me talk about in that video, because there's a lot of stuff I'm going to cover there and how I can purchase a machine like this at the price that I got it at. Alright, if you guys like that, please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe with the notification. I got more great videos coming up. I'm going to be doing more with this guy. I've got some other machines over here. I got this machine right here, my little South Bend that I haven't been messing with lately, and I've got all sorts of other stuff going on. And check out my Patreon if you haven't done that already. I'm going to be doing more videos on that, and I'm actually going to be putting one out here in the next couple days, I believe, about a PRS rig that I built. So be sure to check it out. Till next time, see you guys later. Thanks for watching.